I agree with the sentiments that Representative Holloway just made in the 10th Amendment and the state sovereignty issues. I think we're sadly lacking in that area. I brought with me a document that you may or may not be familiar with. If you are, great. If you're not, then you should get familiar with it. This is the North Carolina Constitution. There are some things in there that are really interesting, and I'm going to read them so that I don't make a mistake in trying to quote them to you. Right here, in the very first section, what the founders, the writers, thought was the most important section was the Declaration of Rights. And in there, okay, just a minute. Age is catching up with me. I'm going to have to get the specs out. It says in Section 1, the equality and rights of persons. I want you to listen carefully because if you haven't heard this before, there are some powerful things being said here. We hold it to be self-evident that all persons are created equal. I'm sure you've heard that before. That they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, the enjoyment of the fruits of their own labor, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, if you stop for a minute and think about that, that says a real big mouthful. Let's just look at it for just a second. Among these rights, these are inalienable rights, they can't be taken from you. Life. I appreciate that prayer that Brother Bob said, life. We're taking life in the womb, aren't we? They have an inalienable right to that. Liberty. That is a pretty broad expression. That is a broad word. That really covers a lot of territory. Liberty means that I can do what I please as long as it doesn't infringe on your liberties. Isn't that what that means? I have the freedom and the liberty to go about my business as long as I'm not interfering with yours. The enjoyment of the fruits of their own labor. Now, I guess we could park on that one for a while. Who is enjoying all the fruits of their own labor? Isn't government reaching deep into your pocket? I mean deep and deeper all the time. I can't help but picture this. When I was coming up, there's this cartoon. You know, when you're little kids, you watch cartoons. There's this cartoon that was displayed, and some bully would come along and grab some guy, you know, grab him by the ankles and turn him upside down and shake all the change out of his pockets and take it from him. I'm telling you, I feel like that's what the government's doing to me. And I think that's the change Obama had in mind. He's going to take all the change you got. We are headed to disaster if this continues. If the spending continues the way it is, we're headed to disaster. And the pursuit of happiness. That means that government just needs to stay out of my business as I pursue those things that make me happy. Because that's a right. And if they're telling me I have to do this and this and this and the other before I can exercise that right, then they're violating the compact, the contract that we wrote. I want to say something here that maybe you've never heard. This Constitution and the Constitution of the United States do not apply to me. And they don't apply to you. They weren't written for us. They were written for them. It was a limited grant of authority to let them know the limits that we put on them that they couldn't go beyond. And they're constantly doing it, aren't they? How is it possible they could even consider a bill that would make you enter into a contract for health insurance, to force you to sign a contract? It shouldn't even been considered. It's unconstitutional to make you do something like that. It's outside of the limits we granted them. Where do you find that authority in that document? It simply isn't there. And we face this all the time. And the interesting part about this is, as you read history, you can find that the states have at times exercised their authority and intervened or interposed, as Madison put it, and said, we're not going to obey that. We're not going to honor that. States' rights, state sovereignty, state independence. we're actually a nation state. We're independent. We're a confederate of states. We're not a conglomerate of states. And we've forgotten that. And I sure have enjoyed talking with Brother, I call him brother, he says he's a Christian, Brother Holloway, when I went to see him up at the State House, and I like his ideas and his principles. And any man who will stand for what's right and what's true deserves our support, because we are lacking that. You see, what we need to do here, people, we have this power. I'm going to read this other section before I get too far. I'm going off on rabbit trails here. The people of this state, this is section 2, section 2, all political power is vested in and derived from the people. That's us. Isn't that us? Aren't we the people? There is no state without the people. All government of a right originates from the people, is founded upon their will only, and is instituted solely for the good of the whole. The people of this state have the inherent, sole, and exclusive right of regulating the internal government and police thereof, and of altering or abolishing their constitution and form of government whenever it may be necessary to their safety and happiness, but every such right shall be exercised in pursuance of law and consistently with the Constitution of the United States. Wow. Oh, that's a mouthful. Have you ever taken the time to read that and try to digest that? The people of this state have the inherent, it resides in us. It resides in us. Soul, we're the only ones it resides in. Exclusive, no one else can exercise it. Right of regulating what? The internal government of this state. That's our power, ladies and gentlemen. Have you exercised it lately? You need to talk to your representatives. You need to let them know. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is the power that resides in us. And I, for one, am tired of just talking about things. I'm just tired of it. We need to do something. We need to take some action. We need to let our representatives know that they need to stop the federal government from interfering in our business and coming down with all these new taxes and bailouts and sellouts and the spending, and having the Federal Reserve spend trillions of dollars behind their back, and when Congress asks them to account for it, they won't do it. They say, we're not going to do it. What kind of government allows that to go on? What kind of people allows that to go on? We need to get up in arms about this. It's time we started doing something about it. It's time you and I, and we can do something at the local level, because the states have the power to stop this. We've been living under a state of emergency, you know that, since 1933. There's a Senate report out, 93-549, that clearly states that we've been under a state of emergency, even way back to the Civil War. They started that. Time? See, I knew she's going to say something like that. Well, that's not my decision. Listen, you can ask questions later, but let me just read a couple of things that one thing. Can I read just one more thing? If you're going to be upset about that, and this has to do with states' rights. Now, the fact is that we are under a state of emergency, and I'd like to get into that. That's a report that the federal government itself has given us. But when it comes to the states' rights, there have been times where we've exercised that authority, and right here is one of them. It said, in the midst of a dispute with the federal government over the Second Bank of the United States, the Ohio legislature voted to affirm the principles of '98. That came to be known as the Kentucky resolutions, and the Virginia resolutions about federal interference. When the general government encroaches upon the rights of the state, is it a safe principle to admit that a portion of the encroaching power shall have the same right to determine finally whether an encroachment has been made or not? In fact, most of the encroachments made by the general government flow through the Supreme Court itself, the very tribunal which claims to be the final arbiter of all such disputes. What chance for justice have the states when the usurpers of the rights are made their judges? just as much as individuals when judged by their oppressors. It is therefore believed to be the right, as it may hereafter become the duty of the state governments, to protect themselves from encroachments and their citizens from oppression by refusing obedience to the unconstitutional mandates of the federal judges and the federal government. And there's many more that can be resorted to that tell you that the states are the ones that have the authority. They created the federal government, and they can ignore it when it exceeds the bounds of the Constitution. Thank you. I wish I had more time, but time is up.